side. So yeah, like it's actually been like overall, it's actually been really good. Yeah.
I like it. I feel like you're bringing positivity. How about
Yeah.
you, Keith and Kirk?
Well, for me, lockdown's been great.
Introverts be like.
Yeah, exactly. It's our world. I mean, we're thriving, for goodness sake. But yeah, extroverts not so much.
Yeah, I feel like your sister's actually struggling. Just like that. How about you, Juliet?
Yeah, I think for me, it's probably been, I think, a really reflective period, actually. I think even though there's so much chaos in the midst of it, it's been a real reminder, really, of things to still be grateful for. So I think it's just helped me to kind of really center on actually having gratitude, which can be difficult when you're so busy and life takes care of itself. So yeah.
You guys are all positive about lockdown, so it's great. Here's us behind scenes, like planning a reunion to prevail and go meet up. But apparently my city is gone. It might be in lockdown soon.
I saw that today.
I was like, no, please, no. Yeah, because apparently a nightclub opened in Preston, and then yeah, from there it just went downhill. I was like, okay, great, thanks guys. If you guys have a reunion and I'm not in it, that's why.
Next time, tell them to make sure they wear masks in the nightclubs.
I know. To be fair, I think they said they were gonna put in the social distancing rules and everything and wear masks and stuff. It's like, but in all honesty, yeah, everyone was just dancing and just and singing apparently, and then our COVID numbers doubled.
Oh
yeah, so I mean, yeah, great. Love it. Anyway, I think we are live now, if I am correct, I hope. So firstly, I want to say welcome to every single person who is watching, whether you're watching live or whether you're going to watch it later. We know we've had a lot of our friends and Common Room squad messaging us like, bring Common Room back, like, where are you guys? So that has been really great, and thank you so much for your support. So today we are back with another episode, and this is Let's Be Real. So just a disclaimer, we're going to be talking about sensitive things. So if you don't want certain ears to hear it, then, you know, you've been warned. But we're going to keep it real. We're real people having real discussions. Yeah, keeping it real. So that's why we've called it Let's Be Real. And today's topic, we're going to talk about sex. And we chose this topic because it's something that is very taboo to talk about in church. So a lot of the time in church, we felt like all we've really heard is like, don't have sex till you're married. And then that's kind of where the conversation ends. But sometimes we feel like we don't really talk about it enough. And we, as young people, a lot of us struggle with this topic, and a lot of us, you know, leave church because of this as well. So we wanted to touch on this topic today. So you may see familiar faces and unfamiliar faces. So I'm going to introduce the Common Room team. Over to the great man here. That's you, Craig.
Oh, on my screen it was pointing at Dougie.
Oh, sorry. I don't know where you are.
Hello, everyone. My name is Craig. Good to see you all. Currently work for the North England Conference, and I've got the great privilege to work with this team on the Common Room.
Hi everyone, my name is Denise and I'm currently in Liverpool, and I'm also glad to be back after 2 weeks long wait of being kind of just chillaxing and, you know, but I'll be in charge as well on the Facebook comments, so feel free to chat with me there too.
Hi everyone, I'm Douglas, on the team. good to be back. Miss you guys and looking forward to this discussion.
Hi everyone, I'm Jehan, and all I can say is I'm actually ecstatic that I'm back. We've missed you all, and I have definitely missed having just casual convos with these lot as well.
And I am Natalie. I am your host for today, but hopefully I won't be talking much. Yeah, I'm also very, very happy to be back. I have missed this. Like, I think we don't like being live because it's kind of scary, but we like it because we know that we get to chat to you guys. So we also have some guests with us, and we're super, super excited. These guys are really awesome. So I'm gonna hand over to Juliet to introduce herself.
Thank you. So my name is Juliet Sweeney. I'm married. I've been married for just over 3 years. I'm an author. I also have a ministry that I run called Really Married. So it's a blog that I write, and we also have an Instagram page that you can find under just search Really Married. And the website is reallymarried.co.uk, and it's basically just there. The caption that I put is to remove the mask off of marriage, to have the conversations that we just need to have and talk about. So yeah, so this is I guess links in nicely in terms of being real and actually honest about what really happens in marriages. So that's me.
Yeah.
Hi guys, my name's Keisha, and this is
my name's Kirk.
And we've been together for 9 years and some months, but we're not yet married. We were supposed to be getting married this year, but COVID happened, so
yes.
Sorry guys. Over to you,
Hi
Darcy.
guys, my name's Darcio. Single. I'm currently a student at University of Leeds. I actually run a small ministry / fellowship called Elect Fellowship, where me and a group of students, we all like just have discussions about different biblical topics, and yeah, kind of like share different insights and stuff like this. Kind of like this, but a bit more Bible study based. You can find me on my socials, Dacio Masala on IG, and if you're interested, just send me a DM and we'll get you on the group chat.
Thank you very much. So we are going to pray, and then we're going to get into the discussion. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for this time that we have together. We know that because of lockdown and everything that we actually can't physically be together, but we're so thankful that we're able to gather people from all over the UK just to have this real discussion about sex. And Lord, I pray that you will be in the midst of it and you will give us the words to say. If there's anyone out there, Lord, who is struggling with this topic, or there's things that they just want to ask but feel like they don't really have anyone to ask it to, Lord, I just pray that you will direct them to watch this and speak to us and just reach out. And Lord, I pray that this discussion will be able to help young people or even older people as well, just learn more about what you have to say to us. In your name I pray, amen.
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 So getting into this topic, so we kind of just wanted to touch on society and sexuality and how maybe society has become a bit more sexualized, or if the perception of sex has changed over time. So Jehan, you're
Okay.
like science and history girl.
So basically I was just looking into the history of all of this, and ultimately if we go back to the era of the Roman Empire, you have this period of male promiscuity being considered normal and healthy, and this was only as long as masculinity would be maintained. However, you have the view of the woman, which wasn't to be promiscuous and all those kind of things. But then obviously as Christianity became involved, we had the replacement of this attitude with that empire, then replacing those attitudes, and the society of that era then adopted a Christian viewpoint, which was the abstinence of homosexuality and anything sexual outside of marriage. However, you then jump on to the Victorian era, to the late 1900s, I believe, and that's the period and the increase and rise of the sexual revolution. And ultimately, this then correlated to a rise of births outside of wedlock and sexual transmitted diseases or infection. And this ultimately, the sexual revolution came with the shift in attitude towards ultimately women's sexuality, homosexuality, premarital sexuality, and the freedom of sexual expression. And not only were these changes seen just in society in itself, but ultimately were seen in literature and film industries also. And all of this, I guess, in short, has just led to a rise in sexual encounters between unmarried adults. And also, as we've seen in society, the divorce rates have significantly increased and marriage rates significantly decreased as a result of this time period. And we see that trend still happening today. And I guess, Craig, if you want to take over and add any more, that's just kind of like the history and society.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jan. The history it's really interesting. Thanks for those insights. For me, I think I want to talk about it from a personal perspective. I remember being secondary school. I'm not going to mention the name of the school. I remember being there, and 1991, 1992. I'm in my second years of school. Then you get into the third year, the fourth year, and the encounters between the male and the female are getting more intense. But it was like little things with us at that time, sneaking off into the woods to you with your girlfriend, and you're gonna go kiss each other or something silly that was going on then. But we found, I realized that, as you start getting older, there was pressure that was there at the school for the guys. There was always that question, oh, have you lost your virginity? And there was like this pressure that was there. And the way that the approach would be towards the girls, I think then it was very different compared to what it is now. There was more of a caution. It seemed at times that it was a good thing for a lady to be able to say she's still a virgin. And there was this, you had songs that would be out around that time. I used to like listening to the R&B, the rap and whatever, the reggae that would be out at those times. But there was those songs, she's playing hard to get. And, so there was always this pressure to see if you could break that barrier. And but things I realized changed within just a few years after leaving school. The music styles, the music that was being sung started to change. And where I remember being on a bus, and I was going back to my school area one afternoon. And on the bus, I'm on the top of the bus, double decker. I'm at the top, close to the back, and there was a bunch of girls at the back seat, and these were young girls, teenagers, and they were talking about sex the way that I was used to guys talking about it. And I'm sat there, and I was feeling embarrassed, like, what's going on? And there was this main girl that was there, and she was talking, saying what she's gonna do to this guy, and he better be up for it. And I was there thinking, whoa, what's happening here? It got to the point where I started to feel sorry for the guy that she was talking about. And I was like, what are they gonna do to him? And they were all this conversation was happening. And I was thinking, okay, this is in the world, I got baptized, joined the church the year 2000. And when it really hit home for me, Because you often think, well, that's on the outside. Everything on the church is okay. People are pure. They're going to wait until marriage. And then I'm at that you know, that holy convocation that we have, the camp meeting. And I remember, you know, some guys came in the chalet, and out of one of the wallets, a condom drops out. And I asked him, I was like, bro, you're at camp meeting? What are you doing with that? And then he looked at me and he said, like, he couldn't go anywhere. So we was just having this honest conversation, a let's be real conversation. And he told me, he said, bro, don't you know? Look, man, some of the girls, they burst into our chalet and they're like, give it to us now. I'm like, huh? He said, like, they'll be saying, oh, yeah, you know, oh, we want to do it, but you're not up for it. And we carry them because we need to show them. My eyes opened wide. I couldn't believe what was happening. And what that showed me, that's when it really hit home for me, that it's sex before marriage is an issue in the world and in the church. And for me, I've realized that over the years, from the time I was in school to where we are now, the music has changed. I think what we see in society, the shows, everything is based around it's okay. If you're not doing it, you're not normal. So there's a lot more pressure now to be seen to be doing sex outside of marriage, in marriage, all of that stuff. But outside of marriage, there's a lot of pressure on the young people now. And I think now more than ever before than I've ever seen, and it's cross-cultural. So yeah, that's what I'm seeing now. And summertime's a headache because you're driving and it's like, it's like you're praying all the time. You just keep your eyes closed because everybody's half naked. It's just terrible. Like, bring winter, quick. But yeah, this is, you can just,
like I said, bring winter quick.
Yeah, you know, like I'm walking with my family and I got my son and like, come here. It's just, the world's different. It's quickly changed. It's become very immoral. That's where we are now.
I wanted to add to that. I feel like, just a second, what Craig has just said, I feel like the society has kind of like the line of what is classed as pornography has kind of been very stretched out, to the point where, you know, we see billboards and social media posts and all of this that are clearly pornographic, but we kind of choose to ignore it and move on. And I think that actually has a negative effect because we become desensitized to the pornography. If we were to put it on like a proper scale, you could say that weekly we probably face like let's say 2 to 3 degrees of the pornography. And though ignoring it is good for the short time, it's not really helpful when we're trying to combat against pornography, because it just makes it easier for us to leap into the further degrees of the pornography. And it just kind of shows how, like, it kind of shows that the need for people to have their minds cleansed, sort of thing, to have Jesus come and really change everything that is happening.
Definitely.
That's so true. That's so true. And like Craig was saying as well, the pressures from society, I think we can all agree that it's not just pressures on guys. Like, I guess when I was younger, I always just used to think that guys had that pressure. But then I guess as you grow older, also see like girls definitely have that pressure as well from other girls or from other guys. So getting into the discussion and everything. So throwing this out there, what is sex and what is virginity? I feel like just threw in the deep end. Go on, Doug.
Yeah, no, I was researching this and I was a bit surprised. It says sex was counted in definition-wise as sexual activity, but also sexual intercourse and literal sex, as in penetration. And for me, that kind of, you could say, surprised me a little bit, because I usually assume that sex is sexual intercourse. But it also had under that bracket of sex as sexual activity. So once we had now we put like that, it's like, oh yeah, that kind of opens up the floodgates, you could say, as to what actually sex is. Because usually I think, maybe if you guys disagree, we usually think of sex as the actual intercourse, but it's also before that, and things are surrounding that too. That is classed as sex, as its definition wise.
Good point. That's a good point.
So just add, it was interesting looking at the dictionary definitions, because I think in terms of what we perceive sex to be, often it comes from, we kind of just pluck it from wherever, because we've never actually had these conversations. And you can't expect to know how to define something if you've never, you know, a similar example is there are a lot of people who refer to women, who refer to their vagina as just the whole of down there, and not actually know there's different names for you know, different parts of their vagina. It's not just like, there's aspects. And I think because of the fact that we never talk about the, as I say, it's just taboo, we don't understand in the first place. So then, okay, so the question is, where does that definition then come from? Because when I was looking, similar to what Doug was saying, it was saying sex is activity that involves genitals, so any kind of activity. And obviously, if you look at sexual intercourse, that's when they say a man penetrating a woman's vagina. And then virginity was also interesting, because they just say the act of having sex. But then if sex is just kind of encompasses everything, and there are some people who believe, well, if I haven't actually had penetrative sex, I'm still a virgin, I can do everything. But it then opens up so much in terms of what is this thing called sex, and how do we relate to it, how do we understand it, and how do we live it, basically. So that's what I found.
Thank you. That's a good point. We have some questions that came in, and I think, although we kind of have an order of things, like I think this question would go really well into what we're talking about. So there's a couple of questions that have been coming in from people asking about, I guess, virginity and purity, and it's kind of that question that I feel like all Christian youth ask, like, how far is too far? Things like that. There's a question that Denise was filtered through. Denise, do you want to ask it?
There is a question. Basically, they were asking about, is anal sex, oral sex, sex? So is it still, because obviously we're kind of tackling about the meaning of sex, and obviously the dictionary is only kind of defining it as penetration and having sexual intercourse. So is there a difference between oral sex? Is it like a safe alternative then for sex, since it's not penetration? So yeah, just to put it out there for you guys.
Dun, dun, dun.
I think because I had the overview as well, I don't know if this is the same question, but there was a question that says, why can't I have oral sex? It's not sex. Is that basically what the same kind of, I don't know if it was the same person, but it was, I'll answer it in a different way rather than is it, isn't it? Because I think what's interesting when it comes to this topic is a lot of the time we'll approach it and we'll say basically what shouldn't happen. It's all about obviously not having sex in the first place, as long as I'm not having penetrative sex. And rather than considering it as something that God has given us to kind of say, this is what you are permitted to do in the context of context of marriage and what I've created it for, we're too focused on the don'ts and the, you know, how can we kind of skirt around it. And the way that I kind of use can explain this a bit better is, if you are having everything but penetrative sex, then you are still compromising. You are still having those experiences that will bring baggage. And I think that's the main thing. These experiences, and I'm talking from experience, I can say this, you will have to unpack it and deal with it in your marriage. It will come back. And the way that it was put, which I thought was really, really poignant, that stuck with me, is they were saying that when you have certain experiences, you don't, say you have an urge and you go and sleep with someone and you're just having this casual sex. Like, you don't just have these experiences and you're just venting and getting it out of your system, so to speak. You're putting these things into your system. So every little experience you're having is mounting up. And when that time comes to settle, you will have to deal with it, because sex in marriage is not the sex that you've come to understand as the world portrays it. And this is the hardest thing that we all deal with when we are struggling with sex and matters of sex. And it all goes back to the idea of not talking about it to begin with, because for most of us, our understanding comes from those who are talking about sex, which is usually those outside of church, which is usually the films we're watching, which is usually the conversations we hear people having at work. And all of those things are shaping sex in ways that are kind of, it's taken us down the opposite route to what God actually wants us to understand sex to be. Whereas if church was a place where we were talking about these things from the get-go, then we'd understand, oh, that's why God says wait. Oh, that's why God says, you know. And instead we find ourselves nitpicking and saying, okay, but oral sex, well, it's not penetrative, so technically I'm still kind of getting away with it. But it's almost like lighting a fire and just putting one finger in and saying, oh, I'll be okay. You know, it's just part of me in there. The rest of me will be fine. You will still get burned. You know, you will still have that baggage to deal with. And I think that's what we need to look at, is the core of what is sex? What does it, you know, what does it mean? How will it impact me? And then the better educated we are as to what sex is the more we can make those judgments. Do I still want to go ahead and have sex, or do I not? Rather than being in a relationship where someone's pressuring and saying, this is love, you know, this is just what we do. You're actually making an educated decision to say, no, this is what God has said. And of course, if you still, even if in spite of all that education, you still believe it's okay for me to have sex, then have sex. But the main thing is that you have that proper education and you have that understanding from what God has said. This is what I've created sex to be. And then that's what will then inform your decisions, so that you're not compromising. Because I've been there and I know how easy it is to say, no, I'm not having sex, so it's okay. But that guilt will still be there. That guilt will still carry through into any future relationships that could have the chance at actually being happy marriages. So
that's so true. Like, obviously I agree with what Julia is saying as well. And oftentimes, because when I was younger, when I was in my teens, I perceived, as obviously my friends were talking about how they were experiencing sex and all that stuff. And they were saying, oh, I'm still a virgin because I've only had this kind of sex, not the sex that it's the normal sex that we're talking about. So it's not true, because any time our sexual organs are sexually stimulated by touching of another person and by just fondling and stuff, we're involved in a form of sexual activity. So yeah, there are questions out there that is oral sex and all this anal, probably sex. Is it sex? The Bible talks about it in Mark chapter 21, Mark chapter 7, verse 20 to 23, where it lists everything. And the Bible talks about sexual immortality, and it kind of been mentioned a lot, 20 plus times in the New Testament. And God is always warning us that everything, every evil thing and evil things that come from within can defile a person as well. And one of the mentioned evil things is sexual immortality. So, and basically sexual intercourse. So yeah.
Yeah, could I jump in if it's okay? I just wanted to say, I think what was said before is true. There's a narrative problem. And the narrative is that we normally get into the sex conversation a bit too late. So then what then happens is that later on, people then say, oh, I haven't done this or I haven't done that. And lots of things weren't explained in the beginning. So that they're now just piecing together, oh, that's just a really bad part, or that's just really this. When really we should be saying that sex is a blessing, sex is great, and sex should be enjoyed in the context of what God wanted it to be in, which is between a husband and a wife. Now, there is also another danger that normally comes up with this types of questioning, which is again with this narrative. The narrative is that, oh, don't think about sex, don't talk about sex, don't do anything about sex until after you're married, and then all of a sudden everything's fine, which is the issue in itself, because you read articles and you hear Adventists, other Adventists, when they talk and they're like, I didn't know what to do, or I feel uncomfortable, or they even feel like having sex with their partner is in and of itself sin. And that is where we get to the point where we think of purity too much to the extent that we lose what it was originally created to be. It's a blessing, it's something good, but as with every blessing, there is a right context in order to express it. And with this, when it comes to sex, and then there tends to be
Sorry, we lost your audio for like
3
seconds. So you were like,
oh, it had to be that, didn't it? Okay, fine. So I was saying oral, anal, vaginal, all of them are classed as sex. So it's not like, oh, if I do one, it's okay because I haven't done that one. No, you're taking part in a very deep and intimate activity, which should be fully expressed normally with your other spouse. And that's how God wanted it to be, because it's not just physical. And people tend to see sex as only physical. There are lots of things that come with it. It doesn't mean that if you have had it, that there is, I don't want to say no hope or something like that. But what it means is that God created something as with a purpose, and we should try and do it. And we shouldn't veer into the realms of it's all bad, so let's not talk about it. Just think pure thoughts. When you get married, then have fun, and then, or the other side, which is, yeah, let's just go crazy right now. And what everybody said about TV shows is correct. Everyone was talking about Game of Thrones. I couldn't make it past one episode because I said, it's porn on TV. No, I can't watch it. So it's like, yeah.
And can I just add on to that? Basically, I was reading this book, and basically it touched on kind of oral sex, foreplay, and all those kind of things. And it was basically just saying that all of these things is prepping for the body to ultimately have sex. And so when we do it, and it's kind of like outside of the marriage context as well, and when we do it, what happens is, apparently, I think Dr. Edwin Bowers, don't quote me on this, he is the one that said ultimately your body naturally goes through shock because it's preparing for something. Your body is naturally preparing itself for penetrative sex. So when we just pause, and when we don't necessarily complete and end with sex, you're shocking your body. And so ultimately, yes, that's why all of these things encompass, and it circles around sex. And basically, one of the quotes that he says is that a young man who loves a young lady and vice versa will not want to do nothing to impart physical health for a girl that he would want to marry. And so it's just posing a question of, you know what, are we going to abstain from this as well? Because I don't want to physically impair you. And there's been research, I can't remember the exact terminology, but there are certain things that happen in our bodies naturally when we don't necessarily have sex. So when we just go through foreplay or oral sex, our body's not completely finished and it feels like it needs something else. So it's a natural shock when we leave it there. So.
Thank you. Can we touch a little bit more on why it's so amazing and special and why we should save it for marriage? Because like Kirk was saying, like, we're often taught in church, we're not taught that it's bad, but almost we're taught that it's bad. Like, you know, you're all single, therefore it's bad, it's wrong, it's this. And then you'll hear friends talking about it, or TV shows or films or whatever, and everyone's raving about it being the best thing since sliced bread, or probably better than sliced bread, and just like, you know, have it all the time with everyone that you want and blah, 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 blah. And like Kirk said, like, they often only think about the physical, but why is it so amazing? We know God's created it. We know that it's for marriage. We know that it's a beautiful thing in marriage, but why? What's the big deal?
Sorry, my little one is just here at the moment. I think what I would say is because of I'll kind of start with an analogy. So one thing that I often think about in terms of comparing when we consider what God's standard is compared to our definition. So those of you who are Nando's fans will, you may or may not know, because I've introduced many a person, they do a drink called a mango quencher. And yeah. So it's just like, you can tell it's quality mango. It's not just like the water to wash the mango that they're using. So when you have their mango, and I've even asked them, like, oh, who's your supplier? They were telling me. But when you have that mango, you know, okay, next time I'm in Nando's, that's what I'm going to order. If you haven't ordered it, you need to try it. That's one experience. If you then have never tried that, and say, for example, you just go to a supermarket and buy their own brand mango juice, and you're just tasting that, and then you're thinking, this is actually nice. You know, that is your level of understanding, because that's all you've tried. Until you've tried go and try it. Until you've tried the Nando's mango quencher, your level is supermarket own brand. And that's pretty much what our understanding of sex is. Those of us who've never ever come to an understanding of what it's supposed to be or experienced what it should be, we stay at we kind of just plateau and we stay at that point. And so that's pretty much what you see in the world. Like when people are raving about it and kind of saying this is amazing, and, you know, here, there and everywhere, multiple partners, that's their level of understanding. And what I think is amazing is it's easy to fall into that trap of going with the flow, of experiencing it, because yes, sex is enjoyable. When you're told for so long, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad, then you experience it and you're like, oh, this actually makes me feel good. You know, what was all that kind of fuss about in the first place? Then it's almost like same with basically Eve when she took the fruit and she was told you will not surely die. And then she was like, yeah, I'm not, you know, and the story goes on. So that's pretty much that the devil has repeated that same lie to us with sex. And so when we fall into that trap, that's basically all we see sex as, what the world is telling us it is, what we then experience, like a quick fix here, quick fix there. I'm just going to masturbate here, I'm going to use this sex toy there. And that is our, you know, that's our understanding of sex. But then when you get to the next level and you start to actually have that walk with God and understanding more about God and sex are so tightly, you know, God created it. So the problem is we often separate, like, God, how can God create something so dirty? You know, how can God create something that gives people AIDS or STDs and all? We put such a cloud over such a glorious, incredible experience that many of us then get married, and as you said, there's that such shame attached to it from having a life before. If you have been sexually active, maybe you haven't, but maybe you've been told all your life you don't talk about that. You don't, you know, maybe your parents, you just never had a conversation, as is the case in lots of homes. So then, as I said before, where is your education? Often there's nothing. So when you can get to a point where you actually go on that journey to understand, like the way I see it is in so many other areas of life. Like if I want to get into a certain career, I know it's probably going to involve some form of study. If I want to learn how to drive a car, okay, I'm going to have to go and take lessons. And so many areas of life involve an aspect of study, but then it just baffles me that when it comes to relationships and sex, that we just wing it. And we're just like, do you know what? I'll just hope that this thing is going to kind of go away. So we go into marriage with our baggage, and we just kind of hope, oh, let me just tuck it under the bed and just hope he or she never opens it, and we just never have to deal with it. But the way that, because there are some people that also believe that if they've had premarital sex, when they get married, that it's going to solve the issue. You know, like, we're married now, we can have all the sex we want, not realizing that it's basically like, obviously you have the fire in terms of your sexual desire and your passion that you've awakened, but when you're then married, it's the same, but it's contained. And especially if your partner, for whatever reason, isn't in the mood to have sex, this is the one person and the one option that you now have for sex. You can't do what you're doing before and think, oh, okay, yeah, I'm done with you. Oh, this person's ringing up my phone, let me go with them. You know, you have to actually make an intentional effort when you're married to understand, oh, okay, what's happening now? It's that time of the month. What's happening? Oh, okay, they're having like problems, or maybe they've just had a child, or maybe, you know, there's actually a serious reason why, or maybe there's trauma, you know, maybe they've sadly experienced rape or something in the past, but they've just never spoken to anyone. And there's so much that builds up that shrouds that kind of initial glory and celebration that God intended for sex. So why is sex amazing? It's because it's something that knits you together in ways that nothing else can. You know, once you have that bond with someone, obviously there's other aspects of your relationship that you have to be constantly working on. But once you have that sexual connection with someone, it will enhance your marriage in ways, as I say, that nothing else would. And God knew that, which is why he said, this is something I want you to experience in the confines of your marriage, because yes, it's going to be it should be a glorious experience with you both discovering each other's bodies and having these, you know, uplifting and pleasurable experiences through one another. But it has to be that you do it that way and understand it. And as I say, for me, and I can hold my hands up and say that wasn't my experience of waiting until marriage, but the lessons that I've learned as a result of not waiting have made me, well, put me in this position basically, where I can now share with you all, be completely transparent about it and say, look, those of you that are out there having sex, you're not alone, but there's still an opportunity to get to a point in your marriage. Yes, it's going to take a lot of work. As I say, I'm there, where you're having to unpack all the baggage. But once you get to a point where you realize this is actually going to take work, then you'll experience, you can still experience sex as it was always intended to be. But how much better is it that you come in without any baggage, and then you can just go on that journey as God intended and have the freedom of sex with your spouse.
Yeah, just to add on, I loved everything that Juliet just said. It's totally true. The one little bit that I'd probably add on as well is that sex in marriage, there's no fear. There's nothing that you've got to worry about. It's, you know that what you're doing is okay between you and your husband or your wife, and it's also okay in the eyes of God, as long as it's been done according to his will. And yeah, it's an amazing experience. And knowing that it's like that the most holy place in that sanctuary of your home, where you're entering into this space that's just you and your wife, and God has okayed that moment. It's beautiful. So yeah, I'll just add that on.
I wanted to say, sex is is biologically explosive. I mean, when God designed it, he was not joking. The science behind it is incredible. I'm not a scientist, but after being spoken to again and again, you're a young woman, preserve yourself, all of this without asking questions, just throwing it on me. I appreciate the good advice. But I decided to do my own research about sex. And it took me away from the side that we see when we watch TV, when we see billboards and other methods of advertising. And I discovered how incredible, how so intimate it is. Like it's beyond words. You just have to do it, of course. And yeah, I'm not there yet, but yeah, these hormones that just go off inside of your body. And I remember a man that's very much like a father to me having this conversation with me, and he said, what people don't understand when they have sex is these hormones that are secreted, they do different jobs. And one of them is, you might know, is called the love hormone, oxytocin. I remember learning about this in biology when I was in school. It's a beautiful hormone, and it's not at the same time. But when it comes to sex, oxytocin helps people to feel close to one another. And this, he said to me, this intimate moment is often lost when people have it outside of marriage, because many people are in relationships and they have sex, okay, but then they break up years down the line. They've still had that sexual encounter with that person. But he said it's especially important when you're young and it's your first time, because when you have sex with that person and that oxytocin is released and you don't get to click with the person as God would have intended you to, you're left wanting. And that wanting can often lead to stuff like masturbation and pornography, because you're trying to fill a void that didn't get filled because it wasn't necessarily done in the right way. And of course, we should be realistic. We should say there are people out in the world who are in relationships and they've been together for 30 years and they've been having sex, and all of these problems that we're having, maybe they don't have it. Maybe they have that world, but we have God. And so even if we were in such a situation, we should just remember that at the end of the day, it is outside of God's will for us to do it outside of marriage. And we will receive the full benefit, not just the physical, the biological, but the emotional and everything else, if we do it inside of that sphere which he created for us to do it in.
Thank you, guys. Sorry, Douglas, were you about to say something?
I'm just saying, yeah, don't mind me.
Great point. Juliet, there's something that you said, and I know this is like maybe segueing a bit, but I just wanted to kind of touch on it from everybody's point of view, maybe. So there's something that I've heard quite a lot of people say, kind of like a try before you buy kind of mindset. And Juliet said we should be doing our research, and you said when you want to know how to drive, if you want to have a license, you need to actually learn how to drive. But obviously sex that's different slightly, because we shouldn't be practicing before we get into marriage. But do you think there's that kind of pressure from the world of, before you get into marriage, you should know what to do. You should have been able to do it before. Should have done X, Y, Z, things like that. What are your thoughts and comments?
I think there definitely is, and with this kind of goes back to the definition of virginity in the society that we live in now. Is seen as someone who's unexperienced, and as Craig touched on earlier, we have there's a certain pressure for us to be experienced and therefore know what to do and whatever else. And yeah, like, because of that, there's definitely a push towards people trying sex before marriage, and as we know, that leads people astray. And also, like, just from when I remember in high school as well, when I was around 16, I remember we literally had like assemblies where they literally told us, oh, having sex from a young age, it's okay. Like, and they even taught us how to, you know, put on the condoms and all this. And it's like, they're really pushing us to kind of do this. Is so crazy. So crazy.
Now I was going to say also, I think touching on Darshaw's point, I think, at least from my experience, music, for me, I listen to different types of musicians, you know, different types of musicians, especially rap, trap and all these things. And now I'm going in town, I'm listening to music. My mindset is different because I don't listen to the music, I listen to the lyrics. I'm thinking, my little sister who's young and she's playing these songs, and I'm thinking, are you hearing what's being said? Like, everything's basically sexualized. So for me, when I was listening to the music, I'm listening to it, but also it's also sitting back in my mind. So now I'm trying to look for a girlfriend. I have a girlfriend, right? What I've been listening to is what I think is a norm. So all these things are like this person, this is my body count. We're bragging about these things. So naturally, you know, by beholding, become changed. So I'm beholding, for example, Young Thug, who I listened to before, right? I'm beholding him, so I want to be like him. He's had all this girl, he's talking all his music's about what he done with girls. For me, that's what I want to do. I used to watch Power. I used to watch that. I think, oh, this is what he does. I want to be like that. I want to do that. So I found myself in different encounters with women and different things where I'm like, oh, this is what they've done. He's bragging about it. Look how everyone talked about this guy, is an amazing guy. I want to be like that too. So I think what we put inside comes out, and we may not realize it, but everything what we're really taking in is actually coming out. Because I found myself doing stuff, I'm thinking, where did I get that from? And that's why Romans 12:2 says, be transformed. This has to be transformed, because I've listened to so much music for so long that it won't take a year or two or just like this for it to kind of come on my system. It has to be a continued transforming of my mind, so that when I get to the stage of, hey, I'm looking for someone I want to be with, God has been on the process of trying to transform my mind, taking out all this stuff that shouldn't have been there, and saying, no, this is how I do it, and this is how it's meant to be done. And by doing that, by submitting to God, by God's grace, He'll want to enable us to take away all these misconceptions about sex, about all these things that we have, so that we have what God's ideal is, and not the world's ideal.
I would agree with everything that he's just said, and I would just add just a little 2 pence onto that to say, I used to work in a bank, and I had colleagues, and the colleagues used to tease me, and they used to say, oh, you're the Christian, no, you have a girlfriend for how long? And you haven't had to, wait, how long? And then they would do all of that. And then certain questions then started to come up. And then you then had to say, because some of them are now my friends, and then they ask questions, and I said, well, God doesn't want this to be this way. And at first you go through a sense of like, oh, you're weird, you're wrong, and you go through like a bit of mocking, but then as time goes on, they respect you. It's kind of like being the salt of the earth and being that light that God wants you to be. Because what then starts to happen is, when one of my friends had a problem with the guy she was dating, one of them who she said, this is what he's done to me, and she was crying, then we went away, we prayed together because of something which happened. So what I'm saying is that it may feel unpopular in the moment, but you would be surprised how much of an influence you have by being that pillar. And also when they ask you questions, you can be smart back and say, when they say stuff like, oh, you should try, you know, don't you normally test drive a car or all of this? And then I said, oh, okay, so the first human beings, I wonder who taught them, since they didn't have all of these people, you know, who taught them? They must have discovered how to do it, you know, following God's way. So it can work for them, it can work for me. And then you can just do stuff like that. You don't have to be on the defensive. You can go forward with this and say, you know what? I'm on God's side. I feel strong. I'm happy and I'm going to do this. And you'd be surprised how much people you then influence.
Can I just add on to what was just said? Totally agree. You know, the world's got this idea that you need to, you know, try before you buy, that type of experience. And, you know, the music, as Dougie was saying, those shows that you might watch, Power or whatever it was called, and you enter into this moment outside of marriage and outside of God's will, where you wanting to have this experience, like, and it won't meet the experience that you've seen in Power, that you heard on the songs, or what your people are telling you that it will be like. It's like the R&B music's not playing in the background while you're doing all of that stuff in your mind. You know, it's gonna be sometimes quite disappointing. And the thing that makes it different when you're doing this whole thing according to God's will is that you know it's pleasing to him. And like my brother just said there, you have to be prepared to wait. You have to be prepared to do it according to God's will. And you have to put faith in what he's promised you. Outside of that, it's a dangerous walk. And the pressure is real. And I'd say it's real in the church as well. I remember when I was talking to a person a long time ago. This is before marriage and everything. This is when I was just talking and getting to know different individuals. And this lady I was talking to, she was like, yeah, she needs to try before she buys. She needs to know what it's going to be like before she enters into marriage. That's not for me then. And I had to be prepared to take that stand. The thing is, some people aren't prepared to do that because of the fear of what people might say about them. So it's really about denying self as well.
I think in addition to all of those points, I think I'd also add on the fact that I always smile when people say this whole concept of try before you buy, because if you test drive a car, you test the car and then you leave exactly the same way you came when you initially got into the car to test drive it. Sex cannot be put in the same category as try before you buy, because when it involves you physically joining with someone, you don't leave that experience in the same way. You know, every sexual encounter will change you in some capacity. And I guess you could liken it. An analogy I saw that I thought was really good was they were talking about basically a post-it note. And they were saying when you use a post-it note, the more you stick it, the less adhesive it is. And that's basically what happens when we keep having sex. In terms of our understanding and what God intended it to be, the more we're having these casual encounters, is the further away we end up from what God's ideal actually is for sex. And so that's then the whole idea of when it comes to this attitude that I kind of need to know what I'm getting myself into. If God intended for us to you know, be experienced, then he wouldn't have said wait until marriage. He wouldn't have said both of you you know, abstain and wait. And the reason he said that is not just exclusively for that idea of sex. It also kind of I say sex is almost like the core of your marriage, and the way that you treat sex will kind of branch out to your marriage in so many different ways. So if you have self-control, the ability to say, I will wait, you know, for you, I will deny my desire, because it's not every urge you have to fulfill. If you have that ability to be able to do that within your marriage, when someone else comes along who's looking nice, you've already had that experience where you've had to deny and say no, and that desire is not one that I'm going to follow. And the ability of self-control is something daily that you are called to do in so many different aspects. It doesn't just require not having sex when you're married. It comes to, you know, how you react to your spouse when they irritate you. It comes to how you spend your finances. It comes to so much that God knows in that preparation. Basically, waiting is also preparing us for our marriage as an entirety in terms of the character skills that we are gaining from waiting. And I think that's what a lot of people miss, because they just think sex, not realizing that when you get married, I mean, it's easy when you're kind of almost like looking over a fence to see like, oh, what are the married people doing? You know, they kind of walk off down the aisle and you're like, oh great, they get to have all the sex now, not realizing that it's so much more than that. And a lot of people have a rude awakening when they go from having all this sex to suddenly being married, and they're like, oh, you know, what happened? It's like a lead balloon almost, because they're not realizing that when you're married and it's just that one person now till the day that you die, it takes so much more energy to exert into it to kind of be selfless. You've gone from getting this fix and it's me and I'm self and, you know, you're there to make me feel good, to suddenly, oh wait, you know, what's happening, or what's going on with you, or why aren't you in the mood tonight, or, you know, how was your day? And there's just so much more that is required than just hooking up with someone and using sex as a means to an end. And I think that's where we clash, because society tells us sex is basically something to be used. Sex places all the value, sorry, not sex, society places all the value on having sex, whereas we don't give it enough value. And I think that's the issue, is when we get to a point where we can actually say, this is what sex should be, this is how I value sex, this is why I'm going to wait to have sex, not because of what my mum or dad told me, or not because of what the pastor will do to me if he finds out. When you get to a point where you can say, this is my value in terms of what I want for my sexual experience, then your entire trajectory of your marriage will completely shift, because then it's more about your personal intention, based on what God has said and stated. Just like with anything, I mean, I could say to my daughter, don't go and touch this, knowing that if she touches it, it's going to hurt her, but she can still think, well, I want to touch it anyway, and then she'll touch it and get hurt. And so it's the idea of, do we actually trust God enough to believe that he's saying not to touch this thing because he has our best interests in mind and wants better for us? If we do trust him, our actions will line up with that. But if we think we know best, then we'll get burned or we'll get hurt by that. And that's pretty much the story of most of us. It's a common story.
It's true. Doug, then Jay? Go on.
You can go, Jay. I've already, I'll go after you.
Oh, okay. You know, I just wanted to add, I think I had just this open conversation. I think my friendship group, to say the least, was amazing. But when it came to this topic, there was a lot of pressure and external pressures within school anyways, that, okay, you need to do this, you need to do that. And there was just so much pressure on all of us girls. And I think we came back together recently and we just had an honest conversation. And it was the realization that, you know what, we all kind of hyped it up a lot more. And then when he came back recently, we were just like, wait, you know what, all the experiences, all of the things that we used to do, like, let's be real, we hyped it up. We expressed that we weren't actually fully enjoying whatever we were doing. And it was just like that realization of regret and kind of dread with our past, because we were like, it could have been better, or it could have been done in a better way, or I could have waited. And there's just this overhype about it that we hear, but we forget that actually some of the things that are hyped up, some of the things that we are told, the try and buy kind of thing, that's hyped up. And when we look in reality, how many people are actually happy? How many people are actually saying, oh, I wish I would have waited, or I wish I wouldn't have gone to X, Y, and Z before I met you, kind of thing, like Juliet was saying. And for me, when we try and we buy prior to, you know, having sex or waiting instead, it's an impossibility that we get to experience the fullness of what God has created it to be. And we've come to that with my friends and my friendship circle. They're not necessarily Christians and know that this thing is created by God, but the reaction of regret, or I wish I could have done that, or I wish I could have waited, or, you know, there's times where, you know what, actually it wasn't great, let's just be real. And that honest conversation just woke me up to the reality that, you know what, we hype it up so much more than what it actually is. outside of the marriage institution, that we want to experience it and we're so curious about it that when we go into it, it's not necessarily as we expected it to be, therefore left with that kind of regret.
Yeah.
Douglas's favorite phrase is curiosity killed the cat.
Yeah. I won't carry that one.
I was gonna say.
But I think just touching on Kirk's point, I think looking not only on our Christian journey in terms of our conversion, I believe, so Romans 12, I think just blew my mind. I'll read it out to you guys. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. We usually kind of stop there, but if you read the rest of it, it blew me away, right? It says, that ye may prove that is good and acceptable and the perfect will of God. And for me, I'm like, oh my goodness. So me staying away from having sex outside marriage, which is in God's will, is showing to the whole world that, hey, this thing, you have all these urges, all these things that happen, you can't actually wait. By God's strength, by God's grace, you can't actually wait. So it's not, I don't think it's only about us. It's also about the world and what they see, because by us, holding firm to God and say, okay, let's be real, right, guys? It's hard, right? It is hard. We have urges. Nothing wrong with that, but we have urges. But by staying firm and being transformed by renewing mind, we're saying, guys, people out there who are saying, oh, it's fine, I can't wait. We're showing that actually you can wait. Look, I'm a living example of that. And that, look, you can do this. I think that's powerful, because it's so easy for us to follow the crowd and think, oh, it's hard, it's easy, it's hard, I'm gonna give in. But God, by this verse showing me that by not being conformed, we are actually representing Christ in everything we do. We're saying, hey guys, you can do this. Through Christ, you can definitely do this. And like, once you do get married, if God's will for you to be married, what comes after that, it does not, you can't, yeah, you can't equate to it. I think it's so powerful. But we are a spectacle to everyone else out there as well.
Just to add to what Dougie's just said, if you don't believe in that verse, I'm like living proof of that verse specifically, because when I was in the world, it was as if sex just consumed me, and when I turned to Christ, it's literally as if he just wipes that away from my memory. Literally, he right click and press delete, and now I don't even look into that anymore. I don't even lust when I see somebody. I don't do anything like that. And Christ can really transform your mind. I'm not saying go out there, have fun, do all that, and then expect God to change things for you. I'm saying really believe in that verse. And if you are struggling with lust and sexual immorality, really trust God, and he is going to transform your mind, literally.
Amen. Thank you. So that kind of leads us on to a point that we want to talk about. So boundaries. I think we talk about it a lot in church, but yeah, it's something that we do need to talk about. So I guess the question is, I guess it's not necessarily where do we draw the line, but yeah, where do we draw the line? What boundaries can we put in place? Yeah, I'm gonna throw it. I was gonna throw it to Keisha and Kirk because but Douglas wants to answer, so I don't know, it's up to you guys.
Go on, Douglas. We'll follow.
Have fun.
I guess introduction. I think for me, from my experience, I think it kind of goes down to your relationship principles in terms of, are you in the dating section or are you in the courtship section? We don't say this because I was in the dating section. I thought you have fun, you do these things, there's not much investment there. So what happens is, because there's no boundaries in place, that's what usually the dating procedure has. You just do things and then you have no boundaries because you're trying to get to explore, you're trying to do different things. So I found that because I'm in that mindset of relationship and dating, I didn't have any boundaries. And if you have any boundaries, you're going to cross a line. And there is a line, you just don't realize there's a line. And I found that actually, once I switched from the dating principles to actually courtship, as in the person I'm going to marry, and I'm not doing anything until marriage, what happens in that relationship when you're trying to get to know someone is that you naturally, because of the process you're in, you have boundaries, you have measures to go in place, so you don't break them. Whereas in the other, with what does it, you date, you do all these things, you get, you on the first date, you're already intimate, you're not on that kissing, all these things already on the first date, on all these things, you're already going so far ahead. Whereas in whichever road you take, dating or courtship, that courtship, you're taking time, you have boundaries in place, you have accountability, which is important in that. Whereas in dating, you don't have that. You do what you want. And hence why when these things happen, from my experience, also my friends telling me this, is because there wasn't any accountability, which dating doesn't have necessarily, but courtship has accountability. You have someone to hold you accountable, you have things in place, so that there's less romance to kind of fuzz your mind, so to speak.
Okay, so with us and boundaries, it's what I try not to do, and I say this to lots of people in relationships, is I try not to legislate boundaries. So I like principles, and I think following principles is good, but then saying that this is the path you have to follow, I think is damaging, because everyone's in a different part. So I remember sitting in church having a conversation with my friends, and I said, oh, but why do you have a problem with this? I don't understand why this is a problem. And then all of a sudden, God spoke to me and told me, Kirk, what you can do, that doesn't mean that they can do. And then I said, okay, I learned that. So that doesn't mean that what I'm comfortable with or what I'm good with is applicable to other people. So when it comes to relationships and boundaries, for some people, this is it. Even touching the hand is too much. And that's okay for them. They know their body, and they should know with their relationship with God, and being honest about it, that certain things will stimulate them too much and that they shouldn't do it. For other people, they can actually be with the other person and hold hands, watch TV, and nothing happens. And this is kind of what I'm trying to say. So there are, of course, we've already discussed the sex, the oral and anal, and how all of that, that type of intimacy should be saved till marriage. But when it comes to the whole dating and courtship, which I do like, I'll share what I thought. All the people that I was dating, I had at the end goal marriage. Ask Keisha, it's the truth. I thought marriage, because I thought this is what God wants. And if you have that mindset that, okay, this is kind of, I'm looking for the end. I'm not looking for to enjoy my time now. I'm looking for the end. Now, that was just my mindset. And the issue with today is that it's very different to how relationships were once upon a time, where there was a lot more family involvement. There was a lot more culture involved, like arranged marriages used to take place a lot, and people used to get married younger as well, because they understood that these natural urges are there, they're natural, and this is going to need to be expressed in a certain way. Because right now we live in a much more individualistic society, we choose more of who we want to marry, we choose more of this, we have much more autonomy. It becomes, we're now navigating the waters. And if you look in the Bible, which I find is very interesting, you see different types of relationships. And I think that there was a reason why, and I said this before, that no relationship in the Bible kind of looked the same. There was always like a mistake here or a mistake there. And I think that's the whole point. The point of it is that there isn't one fixed rule. There is a guiding principle, which is that you stay inside God's will, you follow it, you do have interests, you do kind of ensure that for me, I don't like the term dating. I think you should have the mindset that, okay, if I'm going to be with someone. I want to eventually marry them. So the term dating, I kind of merge with courtship because it should be in that trajectory. There we go, can't speak. But when it comes to this, stick with the principle. Say, okay, would God be happy if I did this? Am I going to get stimulated too much from this? Is this a problem for me? Is this interfering with my relationship with God? Because one of the things which I think is very good is that I said, I have the responsibility, especially with the person who I'm dating, that I'm not pulling them down. And I kind of set that as a goal. I refuse to pull them down. And it's more about finding that person to pull each other up. So if one person says, you know what, this is too much for me, you listen to it and you kind of work with it. So boundaries, very practical, just whatever you know stimulates you too much, please avoid. But I am not legislating. I'm not saying this is the path. I am saying that there are principles which kind of God has that we should stick to, if that makes sense.
Makes sense.
Can I just comment a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
I wasn't born into Adventism. I became Adventist or around about my late teens, early 20s. And sex wasn't a big issue for me. Yeah, people spoke about it at school. I mean, everyone spoke about it at school. But I think Douglas was saying this before about us becoming desensitized. Actually, I think it was last year. Because it was around me so much, it didn't faze me. And what Douglas said about music was really important to me, because without even realizing it, my music was staining my perception of sex. So when I entered into Adventism, this was a massive difficulty for me. I didn't understand it. I thought, okay, to be Adventist means that you just don't have sex. Anything involving sex, you stay away from it until you're married. But this clashed with how I had been living before becoming Adventist. But then when I started to have conversations like what's going on today at church, I realized that Adventists were kind of as confused as I was about sex. First of all, what is the definition of sex? I mean, we were talking about it at the beginning, and I believed sex to be penetrative sex involving a vagina and a penis, and there's an insertion. That's what I thought sex was. So everything else was, what the heck? I mean, everyone in this room must be a virgin, okay? But after speaking to Adventists, no, now I heard a lot about masturbation. This is bad. But then I heard from other Adventists that you can use masturbate. You can masturbate to prevent you from going too far with your partner, or to prevent you from having sex in general. All of these things. Now I became confused very, very quickly as to what does God say about sex? Where are the boundaries? And as Kirk was saying, you look in the Bible and you're like, God didn't even make it explicitly clear. He said so much, but didn't say anything at the same time. God, what do you want? But then it kind of makes me think about the Sabbath commandment. It's like a two-liner. God just hits it and that's it. There's nothing else. What exactly can I do on Sabbath? What can't I do? I think God left it open for a reason, because he said, don't have sex before marriage. This is it. Okay, don't do it. And you go and you look at the Greek porneia, the word porneia, and you delve into what Paul and the other writers in the New Testament meant by this word. And that's when you start to realize that God didn't just mean penetrative sex. He was talking about the whole thing, because it all is included. And so when you get down to the conversation of boundaries, it's highly difficult. And we just have to admit this and say, do you know what? I can tell you it works for me. I didn't even want to kiss when I got into a relationship with Kirk. I said, you know what? Kissing is just not for me. no, I don't like it. It's disgusting. Do you know how many germs are exchanged when two people kiss? Yes, Natalie, I know you're laughing because you're like me, okay? And I thought this stuff through, but sex didn't faze me. Like, why can't we have sex? And I must say, I have to say this, and we're being real. If Kirk didn't say, no, I'm not having sex, I definitely would have had sex with him. But he put his foot down and he said no. It wasn't my conscience that was moved. I was just coming in. I still had a ton load of baggage coming in with me. It was because the person who I wanted, or I felt I had to have sex with because I was in a relationship with him, otherwise I'd be doing wrong, he said no. But I had no problem with it. And I thank God that he said to me, I'll never forget this. God said to me, do not taint him. Do not. You have your own baggage and I am working with you, but do not drag someone else down with you because you've got stuff you need to sort out. And I think we need to be very, very mindful of that. Sex isn't just about us or me. Sex is about us, whoever you are with, whoever you're looking to get married with. And if you truly love that person, you will hold out. This comes with the fruits of the spirit, the fruit of the spirit. You will hold out, you will ask God for that self-control because you are not just dragging yourself down, you will drag someone else down with you.
Mm-hmm. And as you can tell, both of us had the mindset of we didn't want to drag the other down. And I think that's a very good mindset to have. So, yeah.
But it took time for me. I must be honest. It took many, many years.
Thank you for being real. I feel like we're moving on. Sorry, Douglas. I feel like you're about to speak. Okay, cool. Awesome. So some people also put in some questions about marriage and courtship and relationships, things like that. I know we're over 7 o'clock. I'm sorry, but I feel like we should definitely honor these questions that came in. So like you guys were saying, we want to prepare for marriage. Like we want to not drag the other person down. And we had a question that came in, which says, for those who have had sex before coming into a relationship, is the struggle more real? And how can you accommodate that as someone getting into a relationship with them? So if you're someone who is getting into a relationship with someone who has had sex before, how do you deal with that?
I think what I would say is that transparency is key. When it's so easy to, because shame and guilt is often attached to premarital sexual experiences of any kind, it's easy to omit that from your process of developing a relationship because of the fact that you're afraid that that will be the very thing that will turn that person off. And especially if you see the relationship as having the potential to be serious and, you know, lead to marriage, then you need that transparency needs to start long before you get married. Myself and my husband at the time, obviously boyfriend, we actually had that conversation, and it was, you know, the nature of the conversation was very kind of not, I wouldn't say it was graphic, but it was transparent enough for me to understand this is what I am taking on, because obviously once we get married, your baggage becomes shared. So then it was, the ball was then in my court. Like I was, or we kind of were in a position where we could then take that information and then decide, okay, can we actually grow from this? Because it's not everyone that can take on that kind of baggage. It's not everyone that can, and you need to be honest. You know, I think the more you recognize what you can and can't handle, because I think the reasons why a lot of people end up in damaging relationships and stay there is because they do tie themselves sexually before they're even married, and then they feel almost like they're obligated to then marry this person because they're already involved in sex and they've already tied themselves emotionally, and you know, it's kind of like a snowball effect. Whereas when you have those conversations to say, because the last thing you want is you're as a couple, for example, visiting a church, and there's people there, maybe not even a person, maybe it's people who you've been involved with, or maybe even outside of church, maybe someone sends a message and says, oh, you know, did you know this about this person that you're with? And immediately that will shake the trust in your relationship. So interestingly enough, the very thing that people think is going to destroy actually builds a foundation of trust and understanding, because you're coming into this saying, this is me, these are my decisions, I'm not proud of them. But in any marriage, in not just sexually, in the area of sex, you're going to be taking on the good and the bad, I say. You're going to be taking on the beautiful and the ugly, you know, and this is part of being human. This is part of the challenge that we face on a day-to-day basis. This is us being sinful beings. But the more that we can have that, like the way I put it is that we need to allow ourselves and others to be human. I think that's one of the main struggles that we have in church, is the fact that people aren't allowed to be human. So they come Sabbath after Sabbath with their ball and chain, and they just drag it all the way into the pew. They sit, they listen, and they just drag it back until next Sabbath. But if you came and Sister so-and-so stood up and said, you know what, this week, this happened, praise God, I'm here. Or someone else came and whispered, you know what, can you pray? Because I'm currently facing this right now. If we were actually seeing, you know, even down to, I've had friends who have said, you know what, it's actually tough being in church now. Because I look at the person up the front who's fasting and praying, and they have been for the past 40 days and 40 nights. And I'm thinking to myself, how come I can't be like that, Lord? You know, how come I can't have such a, you know, kind of holy, serious relationship? And I think because we're used to kind of putting on a show, pretty much, we're not showing that humanity and the fact that sometimes, you know what, don't want to pray. Sometimes don't want to open my Bible. Sometimes, you know, I don't want to see you church members. You know, I'm actually really struggling right now. And the more we can have that transparency and say, do you know what, this is where I'm at, is the more we'll know it's okay to actually be vulnerable. It's okay to, and in marriage as an entirety, you're called to be vulnerable in ways that, like for me, like marriage has honestly changed my life, flipped upside down in ways that sometimes I didn't even want it to, but God knew needed to happen. And he intended it for complete character development, to just show you more of who he is. And there's a reason that God says, you know, his ideal, when he says man should not be alone, is because God himself is the Trinity. You know, God himself is relationship. And he understands when we enter into marriage the way he's intended and have that experience, it's suddenly we almost get a glimpse into who God is even more. And so I would say from the get-go, like you need to not, you can't afford to keep that kind of information back, because then it already sets precedence for the kind of relationship that you're then going to go on to have. And if it means that you have to seek professional help, I've been there, and I know that it's such a stigma, but it's the best thing that, you know, I can say that I've done in terms of development and actually working through issues, because there are people who are 10, 20, 30 years in with marriages that pretty much there's nothing left. That could have been solved. The issue started off so trivial that if they'd have just sought professional help, they would have helped to resolve it. There are people that just left it to fester, and sadly it's caused that pretty much sat there and just become the end of their relationship. So ultimately, I think you need to look at from the get-go, what kind of relationship do I want? Do I want the kind of relationship where I can just say to my husband or my wife, do you know what, today was a rough day, and I felt like I was tempted to look at this, and I felt like, you know, I couldn't pray, or I felt like the kids were driving me mad and I just need some time. Can you take the children? Or can you, you know, if you want that kind of marriage, it should begin, as I say, before you're even married. You should be setting that standard. Otherwise, you will struggle when you're married to suddenly become vulnerable, you know, to suddenly say, this is what I'm struggling. Because the worst kind of marriage is a marriage where you're joined together and there's two of you, but you're still alone. And for a lot of people, that is their reality.
And I add as well, you know, when you get into a marriage, communication is key. And even before you get married, communicating about who you are, you need to know something about each other and who you're joining with. in the book of Genesis, where Adam said, you know, a man shall leave his mother and father, and that they'll cleave unto, you know, to cleave unto each other. So when the word for cleaving means to be joined, to become part of that other. You can't be becoming part of another while you're still cleaving onto things that you've had from the past that you need to let go of. Understanding your experiences. If you've had sexual experiences before marriage with another person other than your wife or maybe your husband, you need to know that you can't carry those experiences and those expectations that you may have experienced then into your marriage with you. There was a story once that I heard of a man who wasn't happy with the way that his wife was having sex with him. So he bought her a bunch of pornography magazines and he said, have a read of those, gave her some porno videos and said, watch those and make it better. This was a story that we were told. I was like, really? This stuff happens. And what I'm saying is that you need to know each other, and you need to know maybe some other past experiences that the other may have had, abuse, in whatever form it may have come in, because some of those experiences carry over into marriage as part of the baggage that's not necessarily there to hurt the other person, but it may have results that the other person may not have been aware of, and that impacts the marriage. So you need to, as I've said, as Julia, as you mentioned, you need to communicate and understand that you're cleaving to somebody else. You're becoming one with another person. To become one, you need to be united. You need to be clear. You need to understand, and you need to be prepared to walk that walk together. So I'd advise that.
Thank you.
Just one last point that I wanted to also add. I think off the back, it was you saying it, Craig, that just made me think further, in the sense that what's interesting is when people are when they aren't married and they're having sex, and however many multiple partners or whoever, maybe just the one person, if you're having sex without, having sex generally and you're not married, often people aren't concerned about your baggage. You know, they're just like, you're here to give me a good time. And I rarely hear about people who, you know, that's just what they do and have sex, saying kind of like before they kind of sleep with the person, just like, how many people have you slept with? Or do you have an STD? Or, you know, kind of like, have you had a traumatic experience in the past and been abused? Or, people don't business because they're just like, I'm just here for a good time. Okay. And they don't have any kind of ties, any loyalties, or they can just, you know, get what they need from you and you vice versa and move on to the next person. Whereas when it comes to marriage now, basically the person that you're then committing to spend your life with, they get that culmination of everything that has taken place in your past. You know, they are the ones that will have to decide, can I actually commit to this, knowing that this is something that will potentially impact our marriage negatively if you're not willing to work through this and actually unpack this and understand this. Because that's what the part I think a lot of people miss, is they're going around kind of having these experiences and thinking this feels good for me, not realizing that, hang on, when I get married, it, as I said before, that's it. This is the one person that I now, you know, there's no backup, no plan B in terms of once you've said I do, this is your source of sex and vice versa. And we don't grasp it enough to actually decide, yeah, it's not worth having. We don't, because as I say, we don't have these conversations to begin with. But if we did really grasp the weight that we're adding to our marriage, I wrote a recent blog post exactly on this topic that was saying, the title of it is What They Don't Tell You About Premarital Sex. And that's pretty much what I was covering in it, and saying that idea of, because of the fact that you're having these experiences, you're not actually understanding the weight of what you're adding to your marriage. So God doesn't say, do you know what, you know, this is my ideal. I don't want you to have sex out of marriage because I want to spoil your fun. I want you to miss out on, you know, these amazing orgasms, and I want you to just have a boring, dry life. You know, he's not saying that. He's saying, I know full well what this will do to your marriage. And I know that this will open the door to affairs. I know this will open the door to, you know, a lusting, or this will open the door to a child seeing something they shouldn't because a parent's got an addiction. And all of these real issues, God is just trying to keep us from, because he knows once those things are out of the way, you're free to experience marriage in all of its glory. But when we're building up, it's kind of like we've got this backpack and we're just adding rocks, adding rocks, adding rocks. And then we go into marriage and then just expect, okay, yeah, we're cool now, you know. So we need to really kind of dig deep into this in terms of our understanding, like what sex is actually doing, what it's actually doing in terms of our long-term future if we do want to get married, you know, because there are a lot of people who don't feel like they want to ever get married, or maybe don't even feel a conviction. And I think this is what it all comes down to, because all of us here, we're striving to have a closer relationship and a closer walk with Christ. That is the foundation. And if he is not the foundation, then all of what we're talking about is kind of irrelevant, because we are going to be, boundaries aren't going to matter, you know, we're going to just be doing whatever we want. And there are a lot of people who, for them, they're not at a point in their walk with Christ where they feel convicted not to have sex, or they feel convicted, you know, to wait. And that's their journey. And I think that's the thing, because when you're at a certain point in your life, I've had to be reminded of that, because even though I've had my experiences and I can now share from where I'm at now, it's still easy for me to sometimes give people advice based on where I am, and kind of almost pull them over to where I am and say that this is, you know, you should talk about sex openly. Don't just say it for the bedroom, speak about it wherever. You don't just talk about food in the kitchen, you know, learn to have those open conversations. And as I say, that's been a journey, and I'm still on that journey. Whereas there are people who are at a place where they can't even say the word sex. And so I think the more that we actually appreciate that we're all on a journey, is the more that we'll kind of give that grace to people who need it, because it's not everyone that can say, I've waited until marriage. It's not everyone that can say, I haven't experienced trauma. But just a point was made earlier about the stories in the Bible, how there's lots of different, you know, there's such a variety. And I would add to that, you know, God includes the downright promiscuous kind of, you know, the stories that people would rather, like, God, like the Lord seriously had to include this in the Bible. Everyone's gonna have. There's so much that people would probably rather not share, but God knew that we needed to have the reality. We needed to see, do you know what, you know, say for example, we never saw Saul's history. Say for example, we never knew that Samson had an issue. Say, you know, we'd just be seeing these kind of glorious results and these effects, really. And this is pretty much, I think, what we do in church, which is why there's such an issue, because we in church show that kind of, you know, this is where I am and this is who you should be, and this is not really showing, but this is the process, this is the journey to get there, this is the story. And I think the more that we understand that story, is the more that we'll have that appreciation. Do you know what, that person, they're struggling, like they're involved in all this stuff, but I may not be, but I'm still here for them, and I can still pray for them, I can still encourage them and tell them that there's hope. And that's ultimately, I think, why God wants this body of believers and wants us as a church to come together in ways where it's not just like me, myself and I, you know, I'm coming for this sermon, or I'm coming for this musician, or I'm coming for, but you're actually coming because you love the people that are around you and you want the best for them. And that, I believe, is what will then enhance your life in ways that you need it to. Because I know from my experience, the hardest thing is when you're going through something and you feel there's no one you can talk to and you're alone. But then the reality is that it's often you're far from alone, but the conversations just aren't being had. And all it takes is one person to hold their hand up and say, do you know what, this is me. And then all of a sudden people are popping up like, wow, you know, you're not alone. And so more and more, I think this whole topic of sex, like, obviously it's amazing what you guys are doing, but the more we can get to the point where this is normal, you know, is the more we'll then break down all of those walls that the devil has put up that are stopping us having healthy marriages. And he, obviously the devil's good at what he does, but God is even better. And so the more we can trust, okay, this is God, what God says when he says wait, it's because he has our best intentions. is the more we will see a transformation, no matter what our past has looked like.
Thank you so much. I know we're totally run out of time. There's like one question left. So if it could be a short answer, might pass it to you, Craig, to know. So a question came in which says, is there any restrictions on sex after marriage?
I was going to wait and see if Julia answered before I did. The restrictions you need, it goes back to that thing that was mentioned, I think it was by Keisha, regarding boundaries. You need to respect each other's boundaries in marriage. You know, I may have a different sex drive to my wife, etc. And there is counsel clearly given to us with regards to how the man approaches the wife in the marriage and the wife approaches the man in the marriage. The man cannot be expecting the wife to be at his every whim, wanting her to do everything that he wants her to do. She says that if the woman does that, the man will lose respect for her, even though he's demanding it of her. So in that regard, you need to respect each other's boundaries. But we're also counseled in the Bible that you don't just use that thing as a weapon to say, oh, I'm not going to do it, because Paul says, don't do that unless it's with consent. So there's a mutual respect that's to be there between the two parties. And don't get it twisted, like sex in marriage is amazing. It's amazing, but it's not the be all and the end all. It's the outcome of minds that become connected, love that's experienced between the two, a love that's based on principles. But you need to respect each other's wishes. You cannot force the conscience of the other party. So, you know, the guy might say, oh yeah, I want you to do this. And she says, well, I'm not comfortable doing that. Or it's the other way around. You have to respect that person's conscience. You can't force that conscience. There were the points that were made earlier about oral sex and anal sex, etc., etc. I'd advise you to read the book Counsels on Sexual Behavior by Ellen G. White. She covers a lot of things, though she doesn't say it in black and white. There are some things in there which we're counseled on. And again, it's all down to the conscience and study, have your own personal study, but you need to talk together. Make sure that you understand each other and understand each other's boundaries and respect those things. And don't try to make the other person into what you want them to be. Enjoy the individual that you've married as you're united together as a team. So that's what I'd say in regards to restrictions in marriage. Julia, I'll hand over to you if there's anything that you want to say.
Thanks, Greg. Well, I think you kind of said it really well. I think what I'd also say is that idea of, like you said before, like communication, because there may be things that you may like to try that just aren't happening because you maybe got stuck in a bit of a rut, or you're just kind of expecting this is just how it goes. I think it's important to also recognize that your sex in marriage is always evolving. You know, it's not the same when you first get married as it is in terms of after you've had a child, for example. It's not saying that you don't still have the same amazing experience, but it's understanding that how your body is changing, and even down to the journey when you're first having sex. Maybe it's certain things that you've maybe you don't know when it comes to sex, you're kind of figuring out, or maybe there's things that you're trying to unlearn that you're experiencing when you're first having sex. And so it is a journey, essentially, in terms of understanding the person's likes and dislikes, and what someone may start off liking it may get old, or they may decide, you know what, let's kind of mix up, try something different. And so having those conversations, I think, is really important, because there are people who are years, you know, decades even, and sex has never been a conversation because they've just never been spoken to about it, and it remains taboo. And so I think that's definitely important, and is key, is communicating and not being afraid to also say the awkward things, you know. Sometimes because it's such a vulnerable thing, things may not be spoken of because of the fact it could even be down to, say, a sense of like hygiene or smell or something, you know. We cringe at even the thought, but sometimes people have a smell, or sometimes there's a certain things, and then you just don't speak about it, and you just suddenly, okay, not having sex tonight. So just get to a point where you can be completely open and know that anything that's said is not said to kind of hurt or attack, but it should obviously be expressed in love. And the more that you can have that transparency is the more that you can then, God willing, also teach to the next generation what God always intended sex to be too.
Thank you so much. This was going to be the wrap up, but Douglas, go ahead.
Just a quick one. I'm not married, by the way. So I think for me, it's just disclosure. It's important. Just I think linking myself about music. Looking at some of the questions that came in about anal, all these different things, kind of ask God to give you the spirit of discernment. Where did this desire for this come from? Because most of it probably, I mean, these things are very much showcased in different places, especially pornography. So asking God, say, Lord, why do I want this? Where is it coming from? Find the root, because if you read, I'm sure God will help us to just understand where this comes from, whether it's from Him or not. I think the world has polluted us in a lot of things to think things are good, but they're not good, and different things to try stuff because of what we've indulged in previously before marriage. I think that's important to ask God to, for that.
Thank you so much. Just another, I guess, disclaimer for those who maybe have had sex before marriage. Don't at all think that you're less than and you'll never amount to anything or XYZ. Like, please do not think that. And as Juliet said, from her experience as well, and now she's sharing with others like us and with you guys watching. So we all have a testimony. We've all got a completely different testimony. But it's not our past that matters, it's our present and where we're going. So yeah, it's never too late to change, I guess. So yeah, thank you so much, guys, for joining this panel, for this discussion that was longer than it should have been. We said we're going to finish at 7. I knew it wasn't going to be 7. I'm sorry. Probably should have told you that. But thank you so much. Your inputs have been really, really great. And we're probably going to have a part 2. But, you know, we'd be happy to have you guys back. I'm going to hand over to Jehan to pray, and then Douglas will close up.
All right, let's bow our heads and close our eyes as we pray. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we are so privileged to come all together from different walks of life, married, unmarried, experienced, waiting for sex till marriage, whatever it may be. I thank you so much for gathering us together to be able to speak about this issue. Father, it's so prominent in our church and we don't speak about it enough. And Father, we ask that you give us the strength and those who are watching to view sex and our sexuality in a good way, in its right context. Father, help us to be more open in speaking about it. And Lord, just help us to grow in regards to this and help us to never be ashamed of our past as well, but bring our past to you. Father, if we have failed to wait, Lord, I ask that you will forgive us and that, Lord, you will enable us to still see sex as a gift and something that we should be ashamed about because of our previous experiences. But Lord, help us to enable us, Lord, to see that you are able to wipe us anew and create a clean slate. And Father, help us to be able to do that if we are struggling in regards to sex or anything that revolves around it, Lord. And help us as well, those who are preserving and waiting, Father, for that right opportunity. I pray, Lord, that they may be able to experience sex the way you desire them to. And those who are married, Lord, I pray that you will be with them as well. And I just pray that as we separate our ways, that Father, you continually be with us. Help us to grow and help us to continually see you in everything that we do, especially in this topic, and help us to not shy away from it in church and hide about this topic, but bring it forward and make us realize that this thing was given and designed, Father, to be ultimately experienced in a marriage institution. So I just pray that we're able to see this topic, sex, is from a new light and a point and perspective, wherever and whichever way in life we are walking in, Lord. And I just pray that, Father, you be with us as we part our ways once more. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thank you.
Doug, you're mute.
Thank you. Thank you so much, guys. Juliet, Darcio, Keish, and Kirk as well. Thank you guys for coming on and just for sharing your experiences and giving us your insight in what you've been going through. And the team as well. Thank you guys once again. Definitely, they gave you their social media platform. So if you have any questions for them as well, definitely contact them. Juliet has @reallymarried on Instagram, and a lot of insights in that in terms of marriage and the real stuff that's actually happening from different perspectives, even her own perspective. So if you do want some more information on that from the people who have experienced things, definitely look at Really Married. So thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you next week for Evidence, my weekly story, well, weekly, monthly now. So we'll see you next week, and don't forget to follow us on Instagram, on Facebook, and also to subscribe on YouTube as well, thecommonroom.hub, thecommonroom.hub. And yeah, just keep us posted. If you have any questions, anything else, give us a shout, or if you want to share testimony or get involved somehow, let us know. Also email us at thecommonroom.hub@gmail.com. But until next week, guys, see you later.
Bye, guys.